All right, welcome everyone. We are so excited to have you all here today to join us. This is just a great time of year, even if it is a weird year, to really think about the next step if our kids need intervention and what that might look like and the support that we have through collaborative literacy. So I'm so excited that you all are here to join us. So as you're jumping in and saying hello, I'd love for you to put in the chat box who you are, where you're from, and just introduce yourself. As Gina was explaining earlier, you can see us, but we can't see you. So it'll just make it a little bit more personal to have all that in the chat box with us. So feel free to jump on in there. All right, so we are going to get started, and I'm really excited to work with some of my friends and colleagues here today, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves here in just a minute, but we're all here to just share just some things that we've been considering with the RtI MTSS document and how we want to make that work and really be thoughtful about the decisions that we're making around instruction for our students. All right. So let's just jump right in. So my name is Maria Arnett, and I work with the Collaborative Classroom. I am here in Virginia Beach, Virginia, where most instruction around us is still in virtual learning, and hoping that we will be moving back to in-person soon enough, as we know that, from some data that's come out recently that, the learning loss is for real. As much work as we've all been doing, we would really love to have those kiddos in person, but we know that we are just, plugging along and doing all the things we can to really make sure that instruction is strong for them in these virtual spaces. So Gina, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Maria. I'm Gina Funito with the Collaborative Classroom. I'm in Fort Lauderdale, Florida right now, where we are in person. And so we're navigating what does that look like when we also have some students that aren't able to join us in the classroom yet. In addition to that, this has been a really important webinar for me as I looked on the calendar, because I think these important conversations about making decisions, accelerating student growth, and really attaining to where are students and where might we take them is just a powerful conversation to have at this time. So Stacy, you want to continue the introductions?
Thanks, Gina. Absolutely. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad that you're here. I am in Napa, California, and in our school district, we are in a hybrid model. So we have some of our students who come a couple of days a week, and we have some students who are fully virtual. We used the beginning of the year guidance a lot to get started. And now we are really coming back to the power of the RtI MTSS document and looking at it again as we have come back from winter break. So I'm excited to learn with all of you today.
Great, thank you.
Ready, Stephanie?
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Milligan. I am the coordinator of elementary language arts in Howard County, Maryland. Howard County is a suburban county outside of Washington, D.C. Actually, we're sandwiched in between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Maryland. We currently are fully virtual, and we're investigating what we need to put in place in order to transition to a hybrid model. We've, as a school system, all 42 of our elementary schools recently adopted being a reader and being a writer in the last probably 4 years. So we're utilizing both of those programs and very grateful that we have them for our instruction in our primary grades for being a reader and all grades, kindergarten through 5th grade, for being a writer.
Great, thank you guys so much. It's just so nice to have such a great group of panelists here to be able to share our experiences and things that are going well and challenges that we might have along the way. So I want us to start with a little reflection, because I think, usually when we come back in January, we just really hit the ground running. It's assessment time. It's that check-in for mid-year to see how much kids have grown and progressed in their learning since we started school. But, this year is a little different and we still have to really think about what we've learned about our students. If we haven't been in person with them, maybe that makes it a bit more challenging, or maybe we've just made that real concerted effort to think about what we're really learning about them through that a shorter time together. But I want you to think for just a minute, what do you really know about your students? About them as readers, about them as writers, and about them as classroom community members as a whole. And I'm going to go back, and Stacy was mentioning this, the beginning of the year guidance document. I'm going to pull a couple of questions that were there when you were first getting to know your students. And I just want you to think now about where they are at this time of the year. But I want you to think about, what are you noticing about your students during whole group instruction? What about small group instruction? What are you noticing about their responses? How are they doing on assessments? What about independent work? How's that going? And what do you notice about them when they find that something's hard or they get frustrated? How are they reacting and responding to those types of situations? So I want you just to think about those questions for a minute. And I want you to kind of keep that in your head as we move forward, because as we talk about the resources that we have here today and the things that you guys have in place already, and the resources that you have in way of assessment and the types of resources that you have in your building, you want to think about who your kids really are and who might need that extra layer of support right now, maybe not always, but right now, who's going to need that extra push. Who might need just a little bit more love and care just to get going. But I want you to really think about your kiddos for just a second. And I want you to keep that in mind. So feel free to jot any notes down. I sometimes jot the names of particular kids that pop into my head when I have these types of discussions, because for some reason they'll pop in and I'm like, huh, why am I struggling with this one? And so as we talk through things, sometimes these answers will come to me that will help really support those specific kids. So I'm going to start here with a quote that I'd like you to take a look at. Because we know that high quality aligned curriculum is really an opportunity to provide equitable access to instruction in our classrooms. And so for those of you that are using Collaborative Classroom and you've got an aligned curriculum that you know supports kids across their entire literacy block, you can feel confident that they're getting that consistent piece across your school year, but also across your grade levels. So just take a minute and read this. So a couple of things I just want to kind of consider as we think about this. Having a high quality aligned curriculum is so important for your kids and does provide that equitable access to instruction, but also this opportunity as a team. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we kind of go through today too. But as a team, to really be able to sit and collaborate, and I use sit kind of, I guess, loosely, you might be doing that in the virtual space still, but being able to talk through some things and to have those conversations as a group about your kids as a whole and learners across the grade level. So we'll talk a little bit about that team learning as well as we go through today. So I'm going to stop here in just a second and share with you, I'm actually, my friends, my colleagues are going to put the RtI MTSS guidance document in the chat box for you to access quickly. But if you have access to your learning portal, that can also be found on the learning portal. So you have access to that digitally, and here you can pull it up quickly. But I wanted to just remind you that it is on the learning portal in the professional learning and implementation tab. And you'll notice the RtI MTS guidance chiclet right there on the left-hand side. So that's actually where you'll be able to find this document when you're looking for it as you're pulling up your resources on the learning portal. So I'm going to stop my share for just a second. I'm going to invite you to pull up these documents that are in the chat box, and then I'm going to pull up my learning portal because there are a couple of things I want to share with you that are on there that are not in the document. Okay. All right, so hopefully you're able to access those documents quickly. I want you just to take a minute to kind of familiarize yourself with the document.
And then we're going to get a chance, Maria, today to go through the document, but there's some distinct sections. So you might want to just kind of do a quick search through that so you can get ready for those, the introduction, the tier 1 and the grade level, tier 2, and then the grade level conversations, because you're going to take us through that.
Yes, perfect. All right, so I am going to share my screen again so that you can see where I found those documents. So here I am on the Learning Portal. Hopefully you're able to see that on your screen. So here I went ahead and clicked on the Professional Learning tab, and I'm going to click on the RtI MTSS Guidance Chicklet. And from here, I'll be able to open the document that we put in the chat box here, the Guidance for Reading Instruction and Collaborative Literacy. What you will notice, and as we read through and familiarize ourselves with this document, it will mention these appendices that are not, we've kind of streamlined that document so it's not so overwhelming, but instead put these all in one place so that you have access to them quickly when you are planning and using your resources here. So here you'll notice the appendices that will be mentioned throughout, and a lot of these have been added in response to the virtual learning setting, or just from feedback that we've been given by teachers of, you know, we really need this at the beginning of the year. We really need this here, and we really need a little bit more support in this area. So these appendices have been added for that reason as well. So we'll refer to them too, but I just wanted you to know that they're not in that document that you have there, but they live in the Learning Portal. Okay.
Maria, we found that the document was getting very unyieldy as large as it got. So this gave us a great way to kind of take the document and then the appendices separated. I'm also really excited because a little later we'll get to have a conversation around making a connection to working in collaboration with Stephanie and her district and hearing from teachers that impacted a change we made in the appendices for the 2020 version.
Awesome. That sounds great. Thank you. Okay, so as you're taking a look at the document, I am going to walk you through some important pieces here, but I do want you to familiarize yourself with the contents of this document so that we'll know where everything lives. So I'm going to just quickly reshare here. All right, so hopefully you can see my 4 squares there, I guess rectangles there, for the guidance for reading instruction and collaborative literacy. So you'll notice the table of contents and a little introduction there. You'll also notice that we break it down by specific grade level considerations, which is nice. So for those of you that might teach multiple as a special ed teacher or as a resource teacher or an interventionist, you'll have access to those quickly. And then obviously as a teacher, you have quick access to those. And then, like I mentioned, the appendices that are mentioned throughout the document as well. Okay, so those are the 4 big chunks that we'll be utilizing, kind of going through each of those parts and pieces today. Okay, so I want to start with this idea of tier 1 instruction. Okay, and how important it is. But I want you to think back to that question that I asked you earlier about what you know about your students and what information that you've gathered from them just in the few months that we've been together this school year. And I want you to really think about, you know, the types of assessments that you've done, whether it be the formative and summative assessments that you do within a curriculum, the district assessments that you do across grade levels and across districts. But I really want you to kind of keep that in mind as well. Okay, so we're going to dig right in here into the guidance document, really focusing on tier 1 instruction. So we know that without that really high quality, strong implementation of a tier 1 instruction, we're not going to get kids where we need them to go. We can't intervene them out of missing out on just really good classroom instruction, right? So the importance of that is, you know, we can't really even state how important that is. So we wanted to just kind of start there and really make sure that as we're considering, and especially as we're kind of navigating some different places like virtual learning or this hybrid model. So, you know, we're not doing things that we've normally we've not always done. So we have to kind of just refine our practices a bit as a teacher as well. But I want you to just kind of live in this tier 1 world for just a minute. as we dig into the document. And I want you to skim and scan for this first section here around high quality classroom instruction, screening, and support. So take a look at that in the document. And then when you're ready, I want you to move on to those grade level, like click on your specific grade level or scroll down to your specific grade level to take a look at those tier 1 pieces as well. And I'm going to give you a few minutes to do this. And then as you're skimming and scanning, I want you to please feel free in the chat box to share things that pop up that's just kind of resonates with you, just kind of bring something else to mind. It's something that you might not have considered or something that might be a next step for you. Because like I said, we're all still navigating a different space. So we might have to refine some of our practices as well. But I want you just to take a look at that section. And as we do that, in just a minute, I'm going to invite Stephanie and Stacy to share their thoughts on that section as well, and how they might use that as grade level teams and across the schools to really help refine that tier 1 instruction. Okay. Okay, so Stacy or Stephanie, whenever you have had a chance to kind of glance over it, what are some things that are jumping out to you in these sections?
Maria, one of the things that I really notice in my practice as a coach is that I'm really familiar with the document, but my teachers are less familiar with it. And often they come to me when we're talking about a tier 2 intervention, when we really haven't taken, they really haven't, taken the time or remembered to really get in and look at all of the tier 1 support that's there. And so what I did this year is I don't print very many documents anymore, but I do print off the RTI document. And for each of the grade levels, I give them the introduction, and then I give them their grade level section. And I find that we have to, we just have to keep reminding each other to come back to that and not to wait. Sometimes we wait so long, and there's so many nuggets in there that could have really supported our work. And so that's, maybe some guidance that I would offer up to people is get teachers into it sooner rather than later. Just help remind them what's there to support their work. Stephanie, how about you?
I totally agree, Stacy. One of the things that we did, we started this virtual instruction in March when all the rest of us, when the pandemic started, and we really began with having instruction that was online, virtual with reading specialists. So we started looking at tier 2 and tier 3 first. But as we moved into the new school year, we went back to this document and really were considering what needs to happen for tier 1, for first instruction, because ultimately first instruction is the first level of intervention. If we have very strong first instruction, we may develop an environment for kids not to need tier 2 or tier 3 instruction. So we looked at the document and we thought about, like, within the time constraints of our language arts block, where we needed to focus. And, at the beginning of the year consideration, the first thing it said was this shared reading experience. And we had a conversation about that originally and thought about there's probably not enough time for it. We really shouldn't probably be doing shared reading. We'll just get right into having reading instruction, reading groups. And after looking at the RtI document, we realized that the shared reading experiences for kindergarten and for first grade was so important that it had to be uplifted and made sure that it was a part of our instructional program. So now when we look at our tier 1 instruction, we have whole group instruction that includes shared reading and interactive read alouds. And for our small group instruction, we really are looking at the students, the set levels that they're placed in, using those mastery assessments, which the document kind of uplifted also for us, how important it was to not forget about those assessments. And we created them in a virtual, for use in a virtual environment, and we continue to uplift those assessments. So all the little nuggets that are in, like Stacy said, all the little nuggets that are in the RTI document really led us to make decisions about what our practice looks like now.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that's so important that you guys both mentioned that too, about the jumping, wanting to jump right into that, you know, that small group instruction and then that intervention piece, and really look at that early on, especially this year, and how so many of us, we want to do that. And, you know, this time of year in January, we want to just go full force ahead again, right? And this idea of really taking a step back and saying, have we done all that we can in regular classroom instruction, that tier 1 instruction, to give the kids what they need to be even successful in that next layer of instruction, right? And so I think that's so important. And I'm really glad that you guys mentioned that, because I think a lot of us have been in that boat this year, for sure. For sure. So thank you. So feel free to add in the chat box anything else that you notice in this tier 1 section that is helpful for you, or that you might consider as kind of next steps, or to set a goal for yourself to kind of really dig into and think a little bit deeper about that piece before you plow right ahead into January, right? One thing I do want to bring your attention to, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, is the idea of this differentiating tier 1 instruction. And so when you scroll down, you'll see that the gray box kind of pop up. And just a couple of things kind of stood out for me when we talk about differentiating tier 1 instruction. I think this year, more than ever, we're really stopping to think about how important that piece is, because we might not have as much time for intervention as we have in the past, because of asynchronous and synchronous and all the minutes that we try to fit in and all the things that are happening in this different virtual learning space. But I want you to notice those, because those gray boxes, and then the support that's given throughout the collaborative literacy resources, will really be important as you're, you know, really thinking about, have I done as much as I can do for these kiddos here at this tier 1 place? So in that document, you'll notice it talks about the helpful lesson features that are in there, and the support that's offered for ELL students. You'll also see there's a little bit of information there about the IDR and independent work. And so again, that's another consideration, because we might still be in virtual, about this idea of giving kids the opportunity to practice what we're teaching them, and really making sure that they have that opportunity to do some of that independent work, even though they're not sitting right in front of us, or you know, they might not be right at our little kidney-shaped table. But these kinds of things, you know, can really, especially just this year when we've just been trying to focus on so many different things, can get lost, and we don't want that to happen. So we want to make sure that we focus on that differentiated tier 1 piece. So as you go and move down to your specific grade level considerations, you will notice that there are some of those differentiated tier 1 ideas as well, and support as well. So I want you just to take a minute to kind of take a look at those throughout the document as well. You'll notice that it's broken up by different expectations throughout the year, which I think is just so helpful. Just reminds us of what to expect and where we hope kids will be at certain points in the year. And sometimes I think that gets lost. Sometimes too, we get in our heads that we think they should be here, and then we forget, like, maybe they are okay. Maybe I'm trying to go too fast, and I need to slow my roll just a little bit to make sure that they're having enough time to practice and apply.
Maria, may I make a connection to
Yeah.
the differentiated tier 1 to what I was referencing before? Conversations with Stephanie and educators in her district made us aware that some of the kindergarten students were placing into set 3. So they weren't getting set 1 and 2. But because they weren't getting set 1 and 2, they were missing the powerful work around continuous blends. And that was impacting their word reading in set 3. And so one of the things we added new as a differentiated tier 1 guidance is a routine that we first tested out with teachers from Stephanie's district. What our colleague in program development, Valerie, helped us write that, and then we shared it. And now it's made its way into the document as a tool for those students who might get into set 3, haven't had the early instruction around continuous blending, and then that's now there for all of us to access. And so one is, I appreciate the organic nature of the document. That's why we revise it, and we have revised it every year, but for important reasons. And so appreciative of Stephanie and the educators of district for sharing that with us.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Stephanie, did you want to add anything to that?
The one of the things that I value about our teachers in our school system is they are very responsive, and they observe their students closely. And we have lots of conversations with our literacy coaches within our school system about what teachers are noticing and suggestions. So, our teachers are very open and honest to share, how students are progressing, things they feel like they need to do. Today I had a conversation with a teacher that was just really talking about how she felt like she was just moving a little too fast, and she really felt like it was something that she needed to slow down a little bit and go back to reinforce some of the skills that she thought the students had mastered, and clearly as she's moved on they haven't, and giving herself permission to do that instead of continuing to move on. And I think all of our teachers need to do that sometimes. We really want to make sure our students are making progress every single day and moving along. But when we notice that they have started to stumble in a certain area, that it's okay to slow down, back up, do that instruction that those students need, and then move on. Because if not, those gaps are just going to continue to get wider as they approach different skills along the way.
Yeah, thank you. And that kind of reminds me of two things there. This idea of not just plowing through, but really stopping and knowing your kids, understanding where they are, what they need, and using all the information you have about them to make some of those bigger decisions, and how important that is. And then the other thing that you both spoke to is just this idea of working as a team. So sometimes just talking through these things is really important too, because we might think like, gosh, I've never had this happen. This one kid out of the blue just does this, and it's so weird. And then as you're talking to your colleagues, they're like, oh no, I've seen this happen so many times, and here's what we do to get them over that hurdle. And there's just, something about that collaboration that just is very reassuring to all of us, because we get lost in the day-to-day, like, oh my gosh, what have I done? I can't fix this for this kid. And how are we going to get past this? So I think that's really important. All right, so I am going to go back and share my screen here for a second. So now that we have had the, well, let me finish up here with this differentiated tier 1 real quick. Okay, so we've spent a little bit of time talking about the importance of this differentiated tier 1 instruction, and just making sure that we are really thinking about what we know about the kids, where they are, if we have to slow down, give them a little bit more time, and what we can do to do that. So I'd like you to just take a look at this quote before we move on here. So it just reminds us of that critical role that we, have to be really strategic about the differentiation that we do for kids, and what we're providing to them to give them that strong foundation to be able to move on. And then when they still struggle, that's where we make those instructional decisions to support them, and we know them. And so this is from an article, How to Partner with Your Curriculum, from Ed Leadership. So again, just bringing your attention to that differentiated tier 1 piece that's in the document. So you'll see on page 5 where it just gives you a little bit of information. And then in the appendices, you'll also notice, which I mentioned were on the learning portal, where you'll mention some of those as well. So we're talking about tier 1. Here are some differentiated tier 1 considerations for making meaning. Here are some things that we have to think about when we're doing that and making sure that we're really providing everything we can at that level. Okay. All right. All right, so I want you to think, and we kind of talked about this already, so I'll ask the group if there's anything they want to add before we move on here. But we talked about this in program guidance and how oftentimes when we are working through our teacher's guides and our manuals, and we're just kind of making sure that we're doing the lessons as intended and keeping all of that straight, we sometimes miss out on the guidance that's provided over there in the margins. So just make sure that too, as you're working through, you're noticing some of those teacher notes and some of the work that just reminds you like, hey, this might be a place where kids struggle a little bit or might need a little bit more support. Here's the place where you might want to stop and offer this piece to them. So just remember that that in-program guidance there is helpful as well when you're differentiating that instruction and making some of those instructional decisions as well. Okay.
Maria, I might
Yep.
want to jump in here for just
Please.
a minute, because we've talked a lot, about how this guidance supports students who are struggling, what we can find in there to help us with our work. But something that I really appreciate about the document is that there's also support for students who are excelling. So for example, when I have a kindergartner who is placing beyond set 5, what do I do about that? And so I just feel like I know often our focus, especially in our current climate, is on trying to catch kids up. I just do appreciate that there's that support for students who are excelling as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. So important. Sometimes, especially this time of year, I'll say that we worry about those kids that aren't making as much progress. But when we really take that time to reflect and think about how they're doing and the ones that are this time of year just take off, we really have to make those considerations as well. All right, so let's move on and talk a little bit about tier 2 instruction. So I want you to, again, think about what you know about your students, where you are in this time of the school year. But I also want you to think about what else do you need to know? What are some other pieces of information that you need to gather to think about when you're making some instructional decisions about the students that might need a bit of intervention? Or the kids that started receiving intervention already, and that you might have to adjust some of that as well. So we know that this has been a weird year, so some of us have just jumped right into that intervention piece, and it's time to kind of take a stop and think about, okay, how's that going? Where are these kids and what do they need next? So I want you to just take a minute and think about what you know about them and what else you might need to know. So as you're keeping that in mind, we're going to dig into this tier 2 section of the document, this idea of targeted interventions and then specific grade level considerations for this. So for those of you that are using Making Meaning and Being a Writer and those resources, you also might be using SIPs as your intervention at this point. So this might be fresh in your mind as you're looking at some of this mid-year data. Or some of you might be giving district assessments to kind of gather some of that data as well to really determine where kids are and what they need. Okay, so I'd like for you to get back into your document. And let's take a look at that tier 2 targeted intervention section. And as you're taking a look, I'd like for you to feel free, just jump in the chat box as things pop up for you, things that resonate with you or things that just stick out to you, things that might be next steps for you. One thing that I appreciate is just at the beginning, it's just the reminder of what each of the SIPs levels bring to the table. So it just gets me in that frame to think about where the kids are and who needs what, just kind of puts that all back out there for us.
Maria, one thing that really that you were mentioning is kind of the framing of the levels, and how when you have that understanding and you go into the grade level sections, you can see that we're clearly making some guidance around what level is also appropriate for for intervening, as well as what do we know from tier 1. And I appreciate that kind of coordinated effort there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you. All right, and Stacy and Stephanie, what about you guys? What are you noticing in this targeted intervention section?
I appreciate that being a reader and SIPs are so closely aligned. And I know that talking to Gina, you know, SIPs came first and being a reader was developed from SIPs. And you can actually, I mean, you see that alignment and how that actually came to be when you're using both programs. One of the things that it was interesting, I had a conversation with a reading specialist this week. In our school system, we're very fortunate. In this virtual setting, we have reading specialists that are providing intervention to our students that need those interventions, and they are using SIPs. And then we also have a 3-group model or a 4-group model. We have time in our language arts block. The teachers are really making sure that they're differentiating small group instruction, and we have students placed in those small groups. And we have one reading specialist that's a teacher of record in a 1st grade or 2nd grade classroom. And she's also a reading specialist. So she's doing SIPs and being a reader. And what she said is that alignment between those 2 programs and teaching both of those programs at the same time has given her such an opportunity to see how, one, they connect and they build those skills for students to have them progress faster. And she goes, I've never seen anything like this before. She said, you know, I was a reading recovery teacher for years. And she said, and we saw good progress. But me having this understanding of both programs and how they fit together has really increased the progress of these students so much that she said, I guarantee my students will all of them be on grade level by the end of the school year. And that isn't something that is a typical experience for her. So, you know, just the alignment between the 2 programs, I think, is so beneficial, and for teachers to know that they were actually designed to support each other.
Just to add to that, Stephanie, something I've so appreciated this year within the document that we're talking about, but also within the beginning of the year guidance, is I think there's so much more transparency now about moving students between being a reader and between SIPs. And you know, if a student is finishing extension, well, what does that mean for them in terms of SIPs placement and kind of that ease of not having to administer that placement assessment again, but to really help that student who is in perhaps tier 1 transition back into tier 1 in their classrooms, you know, because it really helps us do that much more effectively, I think, than we've really done in the past. And conversely, when I have a student who's in tier 2, when they're in SIPs, what are the implications for that with tier 1? You know, because I have a struggling reader and they're getting this body of high frequency words and spelling sounds in their tier 2 intervention. Well, the last thing I want to do is double down and give them extra to learn. And so I think the guidance that's been provided this year around that has just been just really made us just really lift the level of our teaching in using these programs.
Maria, I'd just like to dip in for a moment because we've mentioned the beginning of the year guidance a couple of times, and we have never had that before. Because really, the RTI MTS document is designed to take us through the whole year. But we felt like it was important enough to have unique guidance for this school year. And so that's why this webinar too is also focusing on that transition, because the beginning of the year guidance didn't only for the beginning of the year, because we wanted to have some unique conversations around that. But the RTI document is now the item, the support that will guide us through that remainder of the school year.
Great, thank you.
It's kind of odd when you go in the document, you see week 1 and it wasn't what, and we didn't use the RTI one, that part. So.
Yes. Well, I think we're all adjusting and in response to everything that's happening, just making sure that we all have all the resources we need, right? So it's good to make sure we know what's out there and what the intended use is for each of them. So I want to go back to that alignment piece. I had a thought about that. I was thinking, like, how many years as a former reading specialist, we fought that battle of a separate intervention for what we were trying to do in the classroom during that tier 1 instruction, and really confusing kids probably quite often, right? And so this idea of knowing that that scope and sequence is aligned, knowing that the routines are similar and the kids are going to have the opportunity to practice and apply those skills that they're learning, I just think is giving the kids such an extra layer of support. And that also reminds me in the beginning of that section of the document where it talks about that definition from the RTI Action Network, that intensity varies across group size, frequency, and the duration of intervention. So really thinking about what kids are doing, what we're learning about them as they're moving through those assessment pieces that are so important that we're using along the way as well. When we're able to have that tight alignment so we can really see what they're able to do, just becomes paramount to that work, so that we're not keeping kids in an intervention that they don't need for the whole school year or for 3 years or whatever it is that we have seen happen many times over, but just really thinking about what they need specifically, using the data from tier 1 to determine that intervention in tier 2, and really making sure that we're helping kids progress along the way.
Maria, that reminds me of an email conversation I was having yesterday about SIPS data. But the person asked me, what questions should I ask myself? What should I be thinking? And I went to things like, what does it look like in shared reading? What does it look like during independent reading? What do you notice about their writing? Because we can't isolate tier 2 from the rest of the day. And all of that, all of those experiences impact the growth and development of our readers.
Absolutely. And I think here at coming from a state where we're in the middle of state standardized testing right now, just remembering that looking across the whole student is just, really important to kids. And we need to know what they can do across their day and how they're putting it all together.
I want to mention that one thing we added in this year that was new too was a bit more overt connection to writing. And if you use the Being a Writer program, in K&1, we have the stages of early writing development. And in just a moment, some of our colleagues will add the link to the actual document in the chat. Thank you so much, because I also think knowing which stage they're in writing gives us a lot of information and a lot of understanding of their progression when they're learning foundational skills as well. So we started to make those overt connections this year in the document.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a great opportunity for us to kind of dig into this. The idea of really thinking about what kids are doing in writing and how we're using that to inform our reading instruction and our reading intervention is so important, because that application piece, that's where the rubber meets the road, right? This is where they're showing us what they can do and where they're still having some struggles. So this document, just a reminder of those stages of development where sometimes, and again, this is another point where I want to put in about the working as a team and talking through these things together, because oftentimes if we have had that class that's just that whole group of high flyers before, and we kind of lose that you know, that judgment of where kids should be at where, when, and where. Sometimes we have to take a step back and say, wait, no, this is good. They are doing really well. I think last year that class was, you know, they are just flying, but this year they're right where they need to be. That's good. So here's what we can do. So I really appreciate just a reminder of those pieces.
Well, and you know, it reminds me of a conversation I had a couple of years ago with a teacher who hadn't gone back to some of that data just because of time and, you know, all of that. And she went back to do the stages of early writing development. It was such a great moment to celebrate growth that she hadn't had a chance to step back from because she was in the moment of
Right.
that. And I was like, oh, what? They're not at that stage anymore.
Right. And if you've ever taught multiple grade levels too, it gets really murky, right? Because you're like, wait, is that good? Is that right? You know, so yeah, for sure.
Maria, when we were talking about the stages of early writing and looking at writing and knowing you, the student as a reader, and then thinking about them as a writer, I always go back to Dr. Donald Bear always talked about using but confusing.
Yeah.
You know, students are using but confusing, you know, really looking at, you know, what they're doing well when they're decoding words, and then thinking about looking at their writing and are they using that same understanding for encoding as they do for decoding, and, you know, and seeing if they are confusing things in that transfer. So that's such an important thing to notice.
Yeah. And I think that is probably a really important consideration this year if we have kids doing a lot more of this virtual writing, you know, like the Google Docs and things like that. So we really have to kind of think about how we can work around that and allow them to show, you know, what they know and what they're confusing so that we can help them out. Right. Stacey, do you have anything to add about that?
I was definitely, you just made me think about kind of conversely, I spent several years teaching second grade. And, you know, one of the things that we notice when we think about a second grade reader, a lot of times they have that prosody and they have that fluency. And sometimes we can really assume that that means they have those foundational skills really solidified. But then sometimes when I look at that second grade writer, you know, I really see a disparity between their knowledge of foundational skills in phonics when it comes, when we talk about encoding versus decoding. And so I so appreciate the, you know, the guidance and the thinking through, you know, well, what might be the holes in the foundational skills that this reader might need. Maybe they're not quite yet ready for set 7. Maybe set 5 would benefit them. The practice they'll get with comprehension as a reader is going to help them grow, and but it also the work that they're going to get with foundational skills, the benefit may actually manifest in their writing as well.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I always say, like, you know, you need to expect what you teach, right? So if we've been through this, we've worked on this, we've done it, we practice it, now I want to see it in your writing. So let's you know, make sure that we make that a point. And sometimes that gets lost. Yeah. Great. All right. So you'll also notice that, you know, just a lot of guidance around, you know, support for those, the small group and the SIPs. So there it mentions the multisensory handbook, which is another layer of support that is offered as part of the SIPs resources. So for those kiddos that might just need an extra scaffold or an extra support, and maybe not at all times, but in specific routines, just to help make sure that they just know how that works and are able to put all of that together, that's there as well. So there's some guidance around that too.
Maria, might I just speak to a minute about grades 4 through 6, which
Yes.
we spent, and grades 3 through 6, we spent a good amount of time really doing a comprehensive update. In the past, you might have noticed the RtI document dipped in a bit into those grades, but now you'll see that we were very considerate of that progression, to Stacey's point, of who are those most independent students that we can nudge forward, and who are those that need intervention, and thinking about that across various aspects of tier 1 and tier 2. And so if you are a grades 3 through 6 teacher, know that that was one focus for us when we released the 2020 guidance document, was to really give you that set support of how do you help all to differentiate for all your students.
Mhm. I think that's so helpful, Gina, because sometimes when we work with the younger kiddos and we're working through all of those stages of reading development, we often know like what to do and what's next. But when our kiddos are kind of all at that place where they're able to read and we're just kind of honing in on some specific areas, that can be really tricky. So that is appreciated for sure. And I also noticed that you just included in the chat box this quick document that just tells you where anything that was updated or revised in the RtI MTS document, that just makes things a little bit easier so that you, for those of you that have used it in the past, can just quickly go and say, oh, okay, here's some new support. Specifically thinking about like kindergarten, there's some additional support in there for letter learning. Letter name learning, and in grade 1 there was some extra review support there to make sure that they had everything they need in place to really get rolling with their learning.
Well, that's another connection we can make to some of our collaborative efforts with districts and teachers, is that we had the grade 1 review actually in the document more than 1 year, but we got some feedback that we needed to add in segmenting, because we didn't have segmenting as a strategic part of the review. So this, in the 2020 document, we enhanced the review by adding segmenting in, which was coming directly from the classroom and what teachers were noticing students needed that to get reacclimated with.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Just so responsive and making sure that, again, working as a team to hear what's happening out there and how kids are learning and what they need and that extra support in. Yeah. So speaking of the teamwork and how we use these resources and the in-program resources that we have, Stephanie or Stacy, would you like to add anything about how you're using these across grade level teams or across schools to just make sure that, you know, teachers have the support that they need to make these instructional decisions?
One of the things that I'm excited about that's new in the guidance is the information around book clubs. Because, you know, when I really think about differentiation in tier 1, the first thing that comes to my mind is IDR. Because IDR is that place where where readers really get to practice those strategies in books at all of those different levels, depending on the reader. And so with book clubs, we have a few grade levels who are working with book clubs this year for the first time. And so that's some new guidance that I'm really enjoying working with teachers. I'm really seeing the power of the book clubs and the guidance from the document around that.
Thank you. Stephanie, did you have anything to add?
You know, I think that I've kind of added a lot as we've gone along, but the one thing that I do want us to go back and think about is that the connection between being a reader, being a writer, and SIPs. And, you know, we spoke about it already, but that curriculum confusion, you know, and for us to be very intentional. And I think that requires, if you have classroom teachers and interventionists, reading specialists that are working with individual students, that how important it is for their conversation to be happening between those two adults that are impacting that child's progress. Because, you know, when you don't think about it, of course, a student that is really struggling with reading, if they're learning different words or different phonics patterns in two different environments, here we've taken a child that is really struggling as it is, and we're giving them two separate things to learn at the same time. So, you know, being mindful of the connection between being a reader, being a writer, and SIPs, and having those kid talk conversations with the adults that are interfacing with that child, and making sure that we are not confusing them more. You know, Richard Allington spoke a lot about that years ago, you know, curriculum confusion, and it still holds true today.
Maria, do we have an opportunity for a question that was posted in the chat earlier?
Sure.
So the question was actually for Stephanie and Stacy, and the implications of how are you managing or dealing with the reduction in instructional time that's happened across this school year?
Great question.
That's a big one too.
It's a very big question. And it's a question that we have conversations about all the time. So in our county, we have about an hour and 20 minutes for language arts instruction. It's really an hour dedicated time. And then we have an additional 20 minutes at a different time of the day where there's additional supports happening. So in that hour time, we have designated whole group instruction for 20 minutes. And then we absolutely meet with differentiated small groups 2 times during that block. And when the students are not on with their teacher in live instruction, they are either doing IDR and practicing, reading the books that they have assigned to them or books of their choice. We've elevated some online platforms for that. We also have another online platform that the students are practicing more of their skills. And it's interesting that teachers are watching the data in that online platform as well as the data that's being produced with them with being a reader. So, we have those conversations too. And then during the other block of time, they have 20 minutes of another reading group. So we do have a 3-group model going on, and our teachers are even though they're teaching everything, that's one thing about elementary teachers, they're amazing. Yeah. They can teach everything. They're shifting very well. We do have designated time, so we're still keeping that same structure. And for our whole group lessons, we have certain days that they teach whole group shared reading and interactive read alouds, and then some days they're actually teaching writing.
Great, thank you.
And I know we're short on time, so I'm just going to say 2 quick things. For us, it was all about priorities. And when we really thought about, we have 2.5 hours each day together, and then we have time, asynchronous time. And what we really decided was we really wanted to prioritize small group reading. So being a reader really looks a lot like it looked like when we were together, because we've made that a priority in terms of our keeping those groups going. And then the other thing that was really a learning for us is around IDR. And a lot of us were assigning IDR outside of our time together, our synchronous time. And we realized we weren't experiencing the full power of it. So most of the teachers here now have gone to have part of their time together with their students actually engaged in students with IDR, and just really to help build the reading community, also to get conferences in, and for students to see each other reading, because that's such an important part. So those are kind of our big learnings, and the 2 things that probably are at the top of our list. And I think prioritizing is what we have to do in this climate until we can all get back to a regular full school day.
I think that's a great way to wrap this up, Stacey, is this idea of prioritizing, keeping the focus on the students, what they need and what's going to be best for them. And then, like always, what can we teach them today that they can use tomorrow to be better readers, right? And writers. So I think that's a great way to finish this up. So I just want to thank you guys so much for sharing your insight and, just your ideas around how you've used this work and how you're planning to use this work over the next several weeks. And thank you for everybody that joined us today. So feel free to reach out to us with any questions that you have. We have a really great Facebook community that teachers all over the country are sharing fabulous ideas of things they're doing and posing questions that you might be able to help support them with. So please feel free to jump on there. It's called the Collaborative Classroom Community. And we look forward to seeing you next time. So good luck and best of luck getting through January. It's always a crazy time and it's going to be great. And these kids are going to just really be great readers and writers for the work that you're doing now.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.